Hi, I'm Patrick Jagir with Cosmic Alchemist Astrology, and welcome to this video. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Thank you to everybody who watches this channel, likes, subscribes, comments, and shares the videos. It's very helpful for the channel. I find it very encouraging, and I appreciate you. If you're not yet a subscriber, I encourage you to consider doing so. Every time I upload new content, you'll get an alert. So thanks very much in any case, and let's get into the topic at hand here. So today I want to talk about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth Windsor, aka Elizabeth Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. The family's real name. They're German. They changed it to something more English during World War I. So she has recently passed, I believe, at the age of 96, and was the longest reigning British monarch in history. She took over in 52. When her father stepped down, when King George VI stepped down in 1952. She was coronated in 53, so it's a 70-year reign. So it's a very long time. So she set that record, and her son, Charles III, has taken over. So people have a lot of different views about it. Yeah, really, if I have to sum up this whole topic, it's that the passing of Queen Elizabeth, it's a symbol that the era of centralized power is over. This era where one person can tell 1/4 of the world and hundreds of millions of people what to do, it's all over. So this isn't just true for the British Empire, it's true for all of the religions, all of the governments. We're going into a whole new world where people start to believe in themselves, and where they're not going to want to suck up to, brilliant, handsome, charismatic leaders who went to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Oxford and Cambridge. It's that era is passing. People are going to start believing in themselves. They're going to be their own authorities, their own leaders, and their own spiritual authorities, because your own spiritual authority is right here. It's your soul that lives in your heart center. And your soul is God. It's a part of what people call God. It's a part of the soul of the universe. So this passing of Queen Elizabeth is all about going into an extremely different era than what we've lived in. It's like the Dark Age ended, but this is like another message. Yeah, the Dark Age is definitely gone. So it's very encouraging. What often happens, those of us who are tapped into the whole conspiracy world, the conspiracy movement, the truth movement, you hear a lot of things about, especially the Queen, and the whole royal family, and everybody on earth who's a billionaire, who has shitloads of money, who wields influence and power. Especially people who are part of this New Age / Build-A-Bear Christianity that still has a lot of fundamentalism in it. People jump right to this whole thing about, oh, Queen Elizabeth eats babies and drinks blood and da-da-da-da-da. Some of that goes on in this world, and some of that still goes on in this world. In my opinion, from what I know, that's a really fringe element sort of a thing among the elites of this world. Most of them think people who engage in cannibalism and blood drinking and all that are really off the wall fucked up. That's not the norm. People don't do that just because they're born into wealthy families or because they get wealthy. So it exists, but it's even a fringe element thing within the global elite. But that whenever Queen Elizabeth comes up, again in these truth movement and conspiracy circles, that's straight where people go. Or they say she's some half reptile half human or half demon, reptile, half human, you know, some alien. I think that's kind of juvenile bullshit. She's a human too. Now, when it comes to this whole alien thing, yeah, I think it's very possible that tens of thousands of years ago, humans from another planet came here and got stuck here. And they established themselves very early on as the rulers of this planet because they had superior technology, superior knowledge of science, astronomy, astrology, you know, the whole bit. You know, the idea is that they were very, what we would consider modern in very ancient times. I think there's a lot of credibility to that, but to say that the Queen of England is like some alien reptile demon, that's very juvenile, and what it is it's a projection of people's feelings of powerlessness. So people feel like they can't change their own lives. So the easiest thing to do is to quit. And what helps people quit is to imagine that somebody is stopping you from making constructive and positive changes to your life. And even better, to imagine that these people stopping you are all-powerful, omnipotent, psychic, shape-shifting, teleporting reptile aliens. Because you can tell yourself, these people are completely, or these things are completely, these things running the world are completely unbeatable. I can never beat them. And so my life is never going to change, so I'm just going to quit right now. That's where that comes from. This is a projection of people's feelings of powerlessness. It's also demonization. And people have been demonizing each other forever. You know, this is done whenever countries go to war. They make the soldiers and the people from the opposing country to look like monsters or vampires or imps or little monkeys or, you know, demons or whatever the fuck. So when you demonize people, what you do is you divest yourself of responsibility. So basically, on an unconscious level, you feel that you can basically do whatever you want to people. You can kill them, torture them, bomb them, gas them. Maybe not you, but you know, your country's military or your country's government can do whatever it wants to those people. And they're perfectly justified in doing it because, well, you know, they weren't human anyway. That is very psychologically and spiritually fucked up to demonize somebody. You know, most people never have to fight for their lives, and that's something to be very grateful for. But if you do have to fight for your life, and you do have to maim somebody or kill somebody, you have to take full responsibility in that. In order to not develop mental illness after the fact, you have to take full responsibility for what you did to a human being, whether you had to shoot that person in the heart, stab him in the heart, strangle him, drown him, you know, you name it. You have to take full responsibility for that if you get in that situation where you have to fight for your life. And even if you're in a situation where you're not doing any fighting, but you perceive yourself as being up against an enemy, you have to allow your enemy their humanity. Because otherwise, you're dehumanizing them. And anything you have to do to that person, it's worse for them and it's worse for you. Because you've taken their humanity away, and in the process, you've taken your own away. You know, there's a saying, it's attributed to, I think, the founder of Shotokan karate, but it's a saying that runs through all the warrior cultures in the world. And the saying goes, slay a man if you must, but never humiliate him. So there's a few levels to that. On one level, again, you rob yourself of your dignity when you demonize and you humiliate someone. You rob them of their dignity and their humanity. And then too, the other part of it is, if you humiliate someone and you don't finish them off, they're going to come back and they're going to get their revenge on you. And it's going to be really fucking personal. And it's going to be horrible for you when their revenge is visited upon you. So that's a very important thing. Anybody who you perceive as your enemy, or your antagonist, or your oppressor, it's essential for you to see that person or those people as fully human, as just as fully human as you are. They have just as much access to the divine mind as you do. And again, that is, this whole concept of divine mind is something I talk about in astrology readings. Because moon has three meanings. It means mind. It literally means moon. It means mind, and then it means divine mind in human form. So man, really the words man, men, and mankind, they're genderless words. Because in the old languages, there were different words for adult male and adult female. So man means divine mind in human form. And then human has more to deal with, like the dirt, like a creature of the dirt. So when you refer to someone's humanity, it's, you know, more their physicality, in the way I understand it. So you have to acknowledge that even your enemies and oppressors and subjugators are just as human as you are. So that's a big thing here when we're talking about the Queen of England. So, you know, this woman was as fully human as any of us. I think in that family, and then in that long line of British monarchs, and that long line of foreigners who ruled England, and then the British Isles, and then the British Empire, she was probably the best in the whole bunch. You know, England has been ruled by foreigners since 1066, since the Normans invaded from France. The Normans were the descendants of Vikings who settled in Normandy in northern France. And then after them, well, you know, there were I take that back. I was going to say there were some native English monarchs, but, you know, the Tudors they were part Norman too. And then after that, basically, well, there was a Scotsman who was Norman by descent, you know, the King Jameses and the King Charleses, the Stuarts. And then after that, you know, Dutchman William of Orange came in, and then you had straight up Germans with the Hanoverians, and then later the Saxe-Coburg Gothas, aka the Windsors. So England has been ruled by these foreigners for 1,000 years. 1,000-year anniversary will be in 2066, if they're still around. So I think Elizabeth, in this 1,000 years, Elizabeth was definitely the best of all of them. She actually apologized to the Irish people for the terror that the British Empire basically spread in Ireland for, what, 700 years? She did a lot of that around the world. She made apologies on behalf of the former British Empire. She didn't have to do that. You know, she is out of the public's reach. She can basically do whatever she wants. So, I mean, it's easy to make apologies, but it's not at the same time. But she didn't have to do that. And a big thing with Queen Elizabeth was she was politically neutral. She never got involved in politics. Politics is a bunch of juvenile, name calling, and blame gaming. It's just, it's schoolyard behavior. And it's a behavior many people learn in their families. So when you get two dysfunctional parents who blame each other for robbing each other of their dream lives, giving up their responsibility and creating their own lives, when you have these two dysfunctional parents blaming each other for each blames the other for robbing him or her of their dream lives, what they're doing is it sets up this us versus them where, each side thinks that they're infallibly good and the other side must be infallibly evil. So, yeah, politics is like, it's the lowest of the low. And it's amazing how many people are still fixated with it. So, Queen Elizabeth II always stayed out of politics. She stayed neutral. I think she probably saw it for what it was. Now, Charles is going to be a whole other story. He's like, he has a lot of left-wing sympathy. He's invested in this whole electric car, which is really a battery car revolution because the electricity still comes from the burning of oil at the power plants. He is going to be a proponent of the battery car revolution. He's totally on board with how the banks and the mega corporations use false progressivism and false liberalism to make even more money and to gain even more power over populations and over governments. So there's going to be a big difference between him and his mother. And he was close to his mother, but at the same time, he didn't get along with her because, he's kind of a childish brat. Not kind of a childish brat. He's like a full-blown childish brat. And actually, I pulled a chart on him. I'm going to pull that up for you. Where's my app? Let's see here. All right, Charles III, Windsor. Yeah, this guy is, he's a Cancer, sidereal astrology. He's a Cancer ascendant like yours truly. So he's sensitive, kind of has thin skin. He gets his feathers ruffled by people. He also has Pluto in the ascendant. And Pluto in the ascendant it's not one thing or the other. It's not good or bad. It sets up different potentials. And really what you have to do is you have to look at the condition of Pluto's home, which is Scorpio, to understand what is going on. So, yeah, Charles has Cancer ascendant, Pluto at 23 degrees. Now, he has a Mars in Scorpio. So again, Scorpio is the home sign of Pluto, Mars, and K2, the south node of the moon. So, yeah. Basically, the way I look at this with that Mars in Scorpio, that gives him a lot of potential to, really, that gives him a lot of potential. And because within Scorpio, it's in a constellation called Jeshta. Jeshta is probably the wildest and most unpredictable constellation or lunar mansion within Scorpio. Because Jeshta, the energy of Jeshta is that when people feel insulted, slighted, or they have setbacks, when they have certain planets in there, they can be the kind of people who they'll lash out at the nearest person they see. Even if they have nothing to do with the predicament they're in. It's like, I was watching KRS Astrology on YouTube, and he was explaining Jeshta, and the way he explained it is like, let's say, a Jeshta person is walking along and like, you know, falls into a hole, like a tiger pit, you know, like a big hole that's got branches over it, and the thing's like 15 feet deep, you can't climb out of it. Let's say like a Jeshta person falls in there. Well, they'll be in there and they'll be having a fit that they're stuck in this hole. And somebody walking by will just look in there, and before they can say, hey, do you need some help, that person down in the hole will look up and they'll say, you're gonna fucking get it for putting me down here. But that person had nothing to do with it. So that's the energy of Jeshta. It can be vindictive, it can be very paranoid, and it has like a certain vanity to it. So because Charles, his Mars, is at home in Scorpio, in Jeshta, and he's got that Pluto, the ascendant, because Scorpio is the home sign of Pluto, and Mars is there, and it's in Jeshta, it can give him that sort of narcissistic, like vain paranoia. So that's a major thing here. Now also, when you're looking at him sidereally in his second house is Leo, because his first house is Cancer. So he has a Saturn in Leo. So Leo is the sign of monarchs, rulers, royals, executive figures. Saturn doesn't really like Leo because Saturn is a minister. Saturn is an advisor. So Saturn doesn't want to be the king. So it's like, I think he is jumping for joy that his mother's gone because he's wanted the throne for a long time. But with Saturn here, there's going to be a part of him that it's not going to like it. I think he's going to like the celebrity. The celebrity of it is going to stroke his ego. But there's going to be a lot he doesn't like about it. Your second house is also your speech. So I think he's going to have a difficult time speaking like and portraying himself as a proper monarch, as a proper king, as a true king and a proper ruler. And that's tough anyway, because these people, these Windsors, you know, this royal family, they're not true kings and true queens anyway. They come from basically a merchant banker family that the Christian church is installed on a throne. And this is a thing that happened, you know, if you've read or seen the Da Vinci Code, you know, when you go back to like the 5th and 6th centuries, once the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as a state religion, it became punishable by death to not be a Christian and to not be a lover and a follower of the compassionate, gentle Christ. And so the churches carried out a campaign of basically removing the rulers within Europe. And there was a group of people. So in the Da Vinci Code, you've got the Merovingians. The Merovingians were part of a large extended family. Sort of a king tribe. They're sort of an ethnic group in and of themselves. And across Eurasia, and even, you know, even I think back in the day in, you know, Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, you know, through the Middle East, people from this king tribe, this tribe of kings and queens and druids, they ruled by the consent of the people. So these people were recognized for having a lot of magical power, having a lot of intuitive power, and having a connection to the earth. So countries would invite these people to come be their kings and their queens and their druids. And the insurance policy they had against these rulers was that these rulers were not allowed to own private property. Anyone else in the society could, except for the rulers. And that kept them, basically kept them honest. It kept property and wealth out of their decision making. It's interesting. Poland until what? Probably the 1940s. Basically had this custom of electing a foreign family to be their royal family. And then, after World War II, that royal family was never invited back. I actually know someone from that family. They still have their titles and everything, but yeah, they were never invited back into Poland to be the monarchs again. So, yeah, that custom was sort of still around until pretty recently. But anyway, this king tribe, they were called the elves, and there's different meaning to the word elves. In one sense, elves are the shining ones. They're like the ascended masters, the immortals. They're humans who no longer reincarnate, and so they serve basically as guardian angels, or sort of, teachers' aides for this earth school that we're all students in. But then this royal tribe, this king tribe, they were referred to as elves as well, and they're actually names of rivers, towns, all that kind of thing all over Europe that have this root word for this word elf in it. So it's pretty interesting. So the Christian churches basically removed these elves, quote unquote elves, from their thrones little by little. Now these people weren't, 12-inch tall Keebler elves. They're actually a tall population. And in Europe, it's like, I think they were kind of ginger. I think that's what they looked like. You see this depicted in a lot of art. When you see Mary Magdalene depicted as being ginger blonde, that's why. It's a cultural memory of these people. So I'd say by about the Middle Ages, maybe, trying to think. Especially, Scandinavia, we're talking probably the 1100s. They were probably the last to go. So yeah, by the 1100s, these elves, these people who ruled by invitation, who could be dismissed at any time, they were driven underground. A lot of secret societies came about because these people, they were driven underground and they wanted to get organized in order to protect each other. So, yeah, so people like the Windsors, like Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles, they're not part of that whole thing. They've tried to fabricate things. They tried to fabricate a whole thing where, Princess Diana was supposedly descended from one of those, these old royal families that were driven underground by the church. Doesn't look like it has any credibility. These people are still out there, but they're not in any royal family today, any reigning one. So yeah, these people were. What happened was the church wanted to get rid of the original rulers in Europe and put people who they'd bribed onto the thrones. The merchants and the bankers that were in the church's pocket. The other thing too was that these original rulers in Europe, people like these Merovingians that they talk about in the Da Vinci Code, they knew who the historical person was, who the whole biblical Jesus story was based on. It was actually King Abgar of Edessa. It's a city in modern-day southern Turkey near the Mediterranean coast. He was born like 30 or 40 years later. He lost his kingdom in 70 AD when the Romans, destroyed Jerusalem and all that. But he never lived and reigned in Jerusalem. But yeah, he was a very normal sort of a king. Really nothing special about him. And I think he and you know, like the church fathers, like Peter and Paul, I think they actually laid the foundations of communism because they came up with this evangelical religion. And to join the religion, you had to give them all of your private property. So it was like, it's what cult leaders do today. You can even find this like in the letters of Peter in the Bible, where there was this couple who was joining the church and they had to sell all their property and turn it over to Peter. And but it turned out they kept like a bag of gold or silver for themselves, and Peter went into this whole narcissistic tirade about, you know, God's going to smite you, and you know, supposedly God smote them. It was really the people in the church who were, you know, ordered to murder these people for breaking the rules. But the whole point with that is that these Merovingians, these original rulers in Europe, they knew who this King Abgar was that Jesus was based on. And when the church came in and basically was threatening people, you need to either convert or die, these Merovingians and these rulers like them were like, oh, we know who you're talking about. That was one of our cousins. Like, it's like, you can't be serious. No, he didn't fucking walk on water and raise dead people, and like, no, that's ridiculous. So the church hated them even more because they knew the real story about all that shit. And really, I think the biblical stories were probably written in Europe as mythology, because especially if you look at the Celtic Church, which the British Empire helped to stamp out, the Celtic Church saw all those biblical stories as mythology for teaching people ethics and how to be good people. So yeah, all royal families today were placed there by the church because they agreed to carry out a reign of terror for the church, basically a convert or die campaign. So yeah, these people, I mean, they're really not true royals anyway. So yeah, Elizabeth had some pretty good points. Charles is going to be a disaster. You know, and there's something interesting going on with Charles here. So he has basically, you know, a German fascist sort of mentor, who is Klaus Schwab. So Klaus Schwab, if you're not familiar with him, he's part of the Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum, along with Bill Gates. And you know, he has famously been quoted, or infamously quoted, as saying, "You will own nothing and be happy." So there's this whole banking scheme where the banks are going to, through the governments, are going to take control of all property, and you're just going to rent from them. And they're going to give you universal basic income in exchange for getting injected with, you know, whatever new experiments they come up with. And, you know, you'll go to war whenever they tell you to go to war. So yeah, that's Klaus Schwab. And so Charles has basically this Nazi German banker as a mentor. Now, when you go back to Charles's great uncle Edward. So Charles's great uncle, or Elizabeth II's uncle, her father's brother, was King Edward VIII. So King Edward VIII abdicated. He left the throne only a few years into his reign. And this was unprecedented in England. So people say that, you know, Edward left his throne because, well, he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, and she was American, and she was not an aristocrat, and she was also a divorcee, which I guess was taboo in those days. Those are the reasons given. That's not the real reason why he left the throne. The real reason he left the throne was that he and his fiancée, Wallis Simpson, were enamored with Hitler. And they actually had a personal relationship with Hitler. And they were basically all on board with Nazism. And so this was a huge scandal because, you know, Britain found it was opposed to Nazi Germany. So basically the Queen Mum stepped in and you know, said, well, not the Queen Mum, excuse me, his mother. His mother stepped in and said, you know, I guess the king or queen's mother is always the Queen Mum. So the Queen Mum stepped in and said, you have to step down because this is making us look horrible. So yeah, he was pretty hip on Nazism. And this, interestingly, I don't know, probably a lot of people listening to this have never heard of Rudolf Hess. But there was this bizarre incident right at the beginning of World War II. I think it was in 1940. I think France and Poland had been invaded, but the Soviet Union had not yet been invaded. So, Reichsfuhrer Rudolf Hess was number 2 in command in all of Nazi Germany. He was a long-time, you know, friend and colleague of Hitler. Rudolf Hess was actually the brains behind Nazi Germany. He basically organized and edited Mein Kampf for Hitler, which is it's a very long, rambling, difficult to read book. And a lot of the Nazi leadership, they were really a mixed bag, but there were a lot of they were blue-collar types. They were not very well educated and, you know, not very knowledgeable, not very polished. Rudolf Hess, on the other hand, was from an upper-middle-class family. He was very well educated. He'd actually grown up in Cairo, Egypt, so he spoke like 5 or 6 languages. So he was kind of the oddball in that bunch. You can almost consider him the cosmopolitan Nazi, if that's possible. Actually it is very possible because Nazism wasn't a right-wing movement. It was actually a left-wing movement. It was called the National German Socialist Workers' Party. It wasn't right-wing. Socialist workers' parties are not right-wing, they're left-wing. It was just racist socialism. But we don't usually think of Nazis being able to be capable of cosmopolitan. Rudolf Hess was. So when the war was just breaking out, Rudolf Hess basically flew to Scotland. He took a plane, flew out of Germany before anyone knew that he was gone. It was a bomber. Could fly a long way, you know, on a single fuel tank. So he flew to Scotland, he parachuted, and he was arrested. He made this flight to United Kingdom because he had a treaty that was signed by Edward VIII, who abdicated, who quit the throne before Elizabeth's father, George VI, took over. So he wanted to basically show this treaty and say, hey, we have a peace treaty, don't declare war against us. So there was a lot of collaboration and collusion with the Nazis. So we have this again with Charles III, Charles Windsor, and Klaus Schwab. Now the interesting thing about Nazism, when you look at it, the face value of it, so let me back up. Most people think that Hitler and the Nazis' #1 enemy was the Jews. Actually, on the surface level, that's not even true. If you read Mein Kampf, Hitler's #1 enemy, his professed #1 enemy, is capitalism and the capitalists. And, you know, he was Man of the Year in what, 1930? He took over in 33. I think in 1938 he was Time Magazine's Man of the Year. He had turned Germany's economy around. People were starving, people were unemployed. Inflation was so bad you had to go buy groceries with a wheelbarrow full of cash. He turned that all around. The Nazis pioneered food stamps, heating assistance, government-funded medical care. What else? Environmental protection, so like Environmental Protection Agency, animal rights. It goes on and on and on. They were huge into charity, to the point where they would actually threaten people with violence if they did not donate to charities. So they were very progressive, but they were also very racist and, you know, pretty brutal. So, yeah, they were not a right-wing movement. So, you have these two British kings, one in the 1920s and 30s, and then the new one, who have these Nazi German mentors. So what you have in both cases is that you have the banks trying to become more powerful. So really, Nazism in 1930s and 40s Germany, it was funded by Wall Street, it was funded by big banks, and the purpose of it was a very deceptive campaign using socialism and progressivism in order to make the banks more powerful. So what it did was it fooled people into thinking that their government was doing something great for them because they cared about them, when really they were being puppeteered by a bunch of banks who were going to consolidate their power and make themselves more powerful. So we have this going on again with the new King of England. And he may get in trouble for this as things come out. And things will come out, what's really going on with the Great Reset and everything they've been doing to further the Great Reset, including making people into medical experiments and creating a bunch of hype about public health emergencies. So yeah, Charles is going to have a disaster. You know, it's interesting too, because Charles the First, who was born in 1600, was decapitated. He was such a tyrant that many of the aristocrats rose up against him, and there was a civil war in England. And he was decapitated by, you know, an executioner with a, you know, big fuck off axe. And it's interesting, their birthdays are kind of similar. So let me see here. Charles Windsor, Charles, you know, now, he was born in, I think his birth year was 1948. November the 19th, and then Charles I Stuart, from a different royal family, was born in 1600 on November 14th. So, you know, their sons are pretty close together. Not much more similarity in their charts. But, you know, I think they have some, I think they will both have disastrous reigns. Well, I think Charles III will have a disastrous reign like Charles I did. I don't see Charles III getting literally decapitated, but I see him getting very humiliated in public. And who knows? Maybe at some point before his life is over, he'll go to some kind of trial. The heat is definitely on his brother Prince Andrew for being a regular guest at Jeffrey Epstein's, you know, private sex island, and being a regular flyer on the Lolita Express, which was Jeffrey Epstein's plane, flying all these powerful, well-known people down to the Virgin Islands. Pretty interesting stuff. And, you know, incidentally, Ghislaine Maxwell actually grew up with King Charles, Prince Andrew, you know, all those clowns. I think they used to enjoy making Diana cry. You know, Diana Spencer, Princess Diana, you know, is what I've heard. So, a question, you know, I'll talk about this with people and I'll say, well, you know, these people, these British monarchs really don't, I mean, they have power and they're not using it, but the power they have is, they're basically wielding it for a corporation, for people you don't know about. So people ask the question, well, who are they wielding this power for? So we kind of have to look at some word games here. Now, let's look at some of the powers they have. If you go anywhere in the former British Empire, you go to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, you see pictures of Queen Elizabeth, and you'll now see pictures of King Charles III in every government building, on their money, on their coins, on their notes, their cash, their paper cash notes. Yeah, in government buildings, even in like social clubs. I think maybe like martial arts studios have to display their image. It's like how, like in a lot of countries, in a martial arts school you have to display the national flag, because the whole idea is that it proves that you're not, meeting in secret to do some kind of overthrow. That's actually a rule in a lot of countries. It happens even here in America. A lot of time a flag is displayed in a martial arts school to just basically testify to the loyalty of the people training there. That's even a thing in the U.S. Navy. Like, I think if more than 3 people meet privately on a ship or on a base, a flag has to be displayed so that they can't be accused of some sort of conspiracy. So yeah, the images of the royals are everywhere in the former British Empire. So Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and others who are considered to be independent countries. But on paper, the prime ministers of these countries are only the head of government. So every country has head of state and head of government. Here in the US, the president is actually both head of state and head of government. But in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and some other countries, the prime minister is head of government, but then the British king or queen is head of state. So they have the ultimate authority. And actually above the prime minister in these countries, you have a director general. So the director general is a viceroy. If you're not familiar with the term viceroy, in colonies, the head official, the viceroy, is basically a representative of the king or queen who has the ultimate authority in the colony. So yeah, all these countries, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, they're still colonies. So as head of state, the reigning British monarch in the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, has the legal authority to dissolve their parliaments and basically strike down laws or veto laws. So there's a lot of power that's on the books but is not used. So then people will say, oh, well, the British king or queen is so powerful and they can do anything. Well, like I keep saying, it's not their power. So whose power is it? So we have to look at this term, the crown. So most people think, in British history, where they accuse some pirate or some rebel of being a traitor to the crown, most people think, and it's actually taught this way in history classes very often, that when they say traitor to the crown, it's taught that they're saying a traitor to the crown, this literal crown, which is a symbol worn by the king or the queen. So basically, it means, it's construed as meaning traitor to the king or the queen. Well, it's not true. Because behind the king and the queen, you have the crown corporation. So it's very deceptive. So what happens is the king and the queen take the blame, and they're constantly taking the fall. They're basically the shit magnet for the crown corporation. So, and it's like, well, what's the crown corporation? Well, the crown corporation is, you may have guessed it, it's a banking cartel. So the crown corporation is Its headquarters is in the City of London. Now there's a big difference between the City of London and Greater London. They're extremely different things. Greater London has, what, 8 or 9 million people in it. It's this sprawling metropolis on both banks of the River Thames. Now the City of London, it's 1 square mile. It's this one tiny little square mile within Greater London. It's one of the oldest parts of the city. And the City of London is an independent city-state, just like Vatican City, just like the land that the UN sits on in New York City, and just like Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is actually an independent city-state. It's really not part of the United States of America. Independent city-states can do things that can't be done within the actual countries. So they're kind of like above the law of the land. So City of London is one of these. Now, it's like I'm always saying, it's the unconscious mind, and it's the symbols within the unconscious mind that really rule the world. Even Confucius said this. He said, words and laws don't rule the world. Signs and symbols do. So you have to look at the symbols and the pageantry and the ceremonies going on around the City of London. So Queen Elizabeth she visited the City of London within Greater London a number of times during her reign. And there was always a ceremony involved, and in this ceremony she would have to get permission from the mayor of the City of London to enter the City of London. So this little square mile city-state. Now the square mile city-state called City of London, this 1 square mile, it's where many British banks are headquartered. Really, it's a place where banks go to set up headquarters because they can do all kinds of things that are illegal in the United Kingdom. A lot of the cruise lines have their headquarters here, and that's a very exploitative industry. They treat their workers like shit. I don't take cruises needless to say. So I've seen it firsthand. I was actually an acupuncturist for a little while on a ship. Yeah, they treat their workers horribly, but they can get away with it because they're headquartered within this little tiny square mile of the City of London. So the reigning British monarch, the King or Queen of the United Kingdom, has to get permission to set foot on this little square mile within Greater London. So if he or she, that King or Queen, has to, and this just didn't happen under Elizabeth, this was all British monarchs, had to get permission to enter the city-state of the City of London. So if they have to get permission to go in there, that means that they have no actual authority within that tiny little city-state. So that's very interesting. And this is the thing that's not made very clear. And this mayor of the City of London always inevitably comes from the ranks of the executives within the mega banks. Very connected, very wealthy, well-educated, well-connected people. So this is the power behind the throne of the United Kingdom, and even behind the Church of England. So, this is very interesting. That City of London has been a power base for a long time. Legends have had it that this, London proper, Greater London, was founded by Trojan refugees, probably close to 4,000 years ago at least. They sailed up the river and actually founded that city. And legend has it that it was it was within that one little square mile that we now call the City of London, this independent city-state. Archaeology is actually catching up to the legends and the mythology, and they're finding, yeah, it looks like London was founded by Trojan refugees. So this goes very far back, and power was always changing hands on the island of Great Britain. You know, whether it was the Celtic kings who were, you know, they were Scythians who came from, you know, the plains of Russia and Ukraine. They're the ones who deforested Great Britain because they were horse people. Your horses are no good in the forest. You know, right around that same time as these Trojan refugees settled in and founded London, these Scythian, these Celts came in, took over Britain from, you know, the Druids who were there before them. And then the Romans came in, and then the Saxons came, and then the Normans, and different groups have ruled Great Britain, but that city of London has seemingly been there the whole time. And, you know, the reigning tribes and the kings and queens come and go, but the city of London and its financial power always remains. So that is the power behind this throne of the United Kingdom. But then even when you look at this mayor of the City of London, he's a figurehead. He's not some micromanager calling all the shots. Because whether you're looking at the king or queen of the United Kingdom, or the mayor of the City of London, or the president of the United States, or the Pope, all these people are CEOs. And, you know, people think that there's a perception that CEOs are powerful and prestigious and blah-de-blah-de-blah. CEOs are basically nothing. CEOs come and go. Usually they last about, on average, what, a year and a half? CEOs are figureheads. They're symbolic figureheads. They come in and they give pep talks. They create relationships. They schmooze. They get people from other companies to buy shit. They make deals. And they're there to make the share prices of the company's stock go up. And they're fired once they fail to do that. So, kings, queens, presidents, popes, that's what they are. Really, in the corporate world, it's like the board of directors and the major shareholders that have all of the power. You know, the boards of directors have way more power than the CEO. I'd say the president of a big company has more power than the CEO. But those are people who have public faces. And really the power behind them is the major shareholders. And they don't like their faces to be seen. That's where the real power is. So governments are basically shell companies for corporations like the City of London, or like the Vatican Bank, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve. They are the corporations behind the governments. So the puppets who are paraded as the head of these governments, they don't have any real power. Now, another era that's coming to its end now, I think, is the era of the corporation. So when did the era of the corporation begin? I would say the era of the corporation, I think it was firmly in place during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. So we're talking the late 1500s. So we're talking about Elizabeth Tudor during the late 1500s, the daughter of Henry VIII. So what you saw after that, well, actually during her reign, what you saw was the Church of England was basically firmly implemented. Her father Henry VIII was the first head of the Church of England. But then under Elizabeth, you saw a full breakaway from the Vatican. Basically what this amounts to is that the Church of England was able to secure a franchise license from the Vatican. They didn't want to be part of corporate anymore. They wanted to be stakeholders, they wanted to have their own ownership. So basically it was like a monopoly was breaking up. So the Catholic Church was a giant monopoly, it was a reconstruction of the Roman Empire. But then the Church of England got a franchise license, and it was actually like that corporation split up. It broke the monopoly. It's like how AT&T has what? 90% of the telecommunications market, for providing service. So like phone lines, data pipes, all that stuff. AT&T always has 90% of it. To make it look like there's competition, real competition, here in the US, the government has laws where they have to allow other companies to compete. So, Verizon, all the rest of them, was it Verizon, T-Mobile, on and on and on. They're only about 10% of the whole market. So that's what happened in England. There was basically a deregulation where the Church of England was allowed to have a franchise license and kind of do things their own way. It's basically English Catholicism. And it went on to be the Church of the British Empire, which, ironically enough, gave us the whole King James Bible. So it's like, do you really think the Bible created by the Church of the British Empire is like the true, unadulterated Word of God? It's like, come on. So this is where all this is coming from. So within this reign of Queen Elizabeth, as colonization across the Atlantic was taking place, and then even after her into modern times, this colonization was done by corporations. So the first ones of note, you had the Hudson Bay Company, which was landing in North America, claiming land. Then you had the British East and West India companies. So these were basically giant corporate conglomerates that were out to exploit the world's resources. So East India Company went to like India, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, Australia, places like that. The West India Company was in the Caribbean, North America, parts of South America, Canada. So there were these giant corporate conglomerates that could use the British military as they saw fit in order to protect their interests. So you see where I'm going with that. So you had those companies, then you had, after that, after Elizabeth was gone, you get to what? King James I, James Stewart. You had the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company founded the first British colonies in Virginia. What was that? Williamsburg. Jamestown, excuse me, for King James. So they founded Jamestown. They ran that whole thing. And then up in Massachusetts in the 1620s, I think, Jamestown was 1607, 1620, 21. You had the Pilgrims from England landing in Plymouth, Massachusetts, what became Massachusetts. You had the Mayflower Compact, which was a corporate charter. And so that was a corporation. And then once the Puritans got to Boston by about, the 1640s, 50s, you had the Massachusetts Bay Company. So these were all companies and corporations. And these eventually evolved into the U.S. government. So there's a thing in the government called the Senior Executive Service. So most federal employees, their pay scale, it's called GS for government service, and it's a ranking system. I think it goes from 1 to, 16 or something. There's different grades. As you work your way up in the pay grades, you make more money, you get more responsibility. Once you get past that top GS, that top government service grade, you go to something called SES, called the Senior Executive Service. Now, through very tedious research, what very intelligent, incredible researchers have found is that the Senior Executive Service is actually a newer name for the Virginia Company. So people in the Senior Executive Service, it's basically the secretaries, the cabinet members, it's the top level federal officials. So you still have this old British company running America, and then people will go, but it's a democracy, and then other people will go, no, it's not a democracy, it's a constitutional republic, we have a constitution. I learned in a history class, my parents fought in World War II, and it's like, no. That's all a fucking facade. It's a facade, just like the King and Queens of England, maintained by a corporation. So, in the end of the 1700s, so this is when Uranus was discovered. Now, when we discover new planets, our consciousness upgrades. As our consciousness upgrades, we don't want to be treated like shit and like slaves anymore. So democracy it was becoming a popular idea. I think it was 1781 when Uranus was discovered. Uranus is the game changer, the status quo changer, the upsetter, the eccentric one. Uranus is the keeper to the gates of paradise. So that was the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. It was the end of the Kali Yuga. It was the end of the Dark Age on Earth that we'd gone through for, a couple thousand years. And so people wanted representative government. So these corporations that stand behind and puppeteer the monarchs, the kings and queens, and the religions, they're very intelligent people running these, and they're not reptile, alien, hybrid monsters. They're humans. They're very intelligent, and they think long term. So they said, we can use this democracy craze as a safety valve to maintain our power. And it wasn't an overnight thing. They didn't go willy-nilly and order the kings and queens and the religious leaders to give their power up, but they allowed it to happen. So basically people thought that once your country had what looked like representative government, all your problems were solved, things were great, kumbaya. It's basically what it was. So you've got the same puppet master corporations running in the background, the crown, which is not the royals again, it's the banking cartel. They're behind the damn representative governments too, because every government, whether it's a king or queen, or it's a president and a congress, or a prime minister and a parliament, they're always broke, they're imperialists, they're power hungry, they waste money, they steal money, they always need more money. So it's the same corporations behind all of it. Now, people are like, oh, that's so depressing. Well, you got to wake up to make things better. And something that Judeo-Christianity has instilled in us over the past 1700 years is that all you have to do is just look upward to the light and the heavenliness and the godliness and follow the rules. Well, following the rules and fixating on light and godliness and heavenliness, you don't learn anything. You just learn how to follow rules well. So basically, you learn how to not get abused by a narcissist. But that doesn't make you wise. It actually stunts your growth and maintains your mentality as that of a child. To become wise, you have to take that divinity, that godliness, and that light into the depths, into the underworld. You have to develop night vision. You have to look at the dark and look at dark things. And it's from a blending of the two that you become wise. So this is not depressing information if you're being an adult about it and you're being mature about it. It's the first step to fixing the damn problem. So, and this really leads into the symbolic power behind the queen who just passed, behind the king who has just ascended, behind the president and the Congress and the bloody blah and the Pope and the Archbishop and your preacher and your parents. They're all symbolic figureheads. They're facades. They're living facades. They play their roles. And their power is, their only power is in how well they maintain their facade. If they don't maintain the facade and they don't look the part, they have no power, they have no credibility, they lose their power. Now, people basically don't believe in themselves, especially after this. In the Western world, after 1700 years of forced Judeo-Christianity at pain of death, they don't believe in themselves anymore. They basically want God to give them things, and they blame Satan when something doesn't work out. And they see their presidents, kings, queens, congressmen, mayors, governors as representatives of God on earth that are here to just, provide for them and tell them what to do. So we have to get out from under that. And this information is what helps us to start getting out from under that. We have to believe in ourselves and not kiss the ass of and worship and fixate on these powerful, good people who went to Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Yale, and they're so handsome and so smart. It's like, you gotta stop kissing the ass and believe in yourself. So, all of these offices, these highest offices in the land, they're fucking facades. They're symbolic, they have symbolic power. They rule over our unconscious minds. That's all the power they have. So, in these corporations running in the background have been using these symbols, these unconscious symbols. So, with this passing of this Queen Elizabeth, and with this awakening going on Earth, today as I'm making this on the 12th of September, 2022, the scientific instruments that measure the Schumann Resonance, which is an energetic pulse, it's the Earth's heartbeat, these instruments have been in a 5-day blackout. So what this means is the energy of the sun is so damn powerful that these instruments don't even work right now. So, human consciousness is a function of how much energy, how much high vibrational energy we're getting from the sun and from galactic center. Galactic center is where our sun gets its energy. So basically it's like our sun is a macro version of our individual souls, and in galactic center is a macro version of the oversouls that rule the individual souls. I'll have to make a video about oversouls if you're not familiar. That's a whole subject. So we just went through a dark age. That's when our sun is not getting a lot of energy from galactic center. So we're not getting a lot of energy from the sun. We've had various ice ages of different kinds for a very long time. We've had many ice ages up into the 1800s. So the sun wasn't very powerful. Our souls were not absorbing a lot of energy. Now we are. The planet's heating up, it's more excited, and we're waking up spiritually and intellectually. So, with this human awakening that's being driven by not just the divine, but the natural world, the god and the goddess, with all of that going on, so many things in the world, so many insights are going to be disclosed, so much information is going to be disclosed. We're going to find the world was never what we thought it was. And these corporations are going to have a lot of trouble puppeteering the world as they have been. So I see these Queens Elizabeth, the first and then the second, so from the 1500s, the late 1500s, until September 2022, they're the bookends in which the era of the corporation took place. I'm probably going to do more videos about this whole concept of the era of the corporation. But yeah, really, if I have to sum up this whole topic, it's that the passing of Queen Elizabeth, it's a symbol that the era of centralized power is over. This era where one person can tell 1/4 of the world and hundreds of millions of people what to do, it's all over. So this isn't just true for the British Empire, it's true for all of the religions, all of the governments. We're going into a whole new world where people start to believe in themselves and where they're not going to want to suck up to, brilliant, handsome, charismatic leaders who went to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Oxford and Cambridge. That era is passing. People are going to start believing in themselves. They're going to be their own authorities, their own leaders, and their own spiritual authorities, because your own spiritual authority is right here. It's your soul that lives in your heart center. And your soul is God. It's a part of what people call God. It's a part of the soul of the universe. So, this passing of Queen Elizabeth is all about going into an extremely different era than what we've lived in. It's like the Dark Age ended, but this is like another message. Yeah, the Dark Age is definitely gone. So it's very encouraging. Alright, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I've been going on for quite some time. I hope you got something out of this. I covered a lot of ground. Maybe there are more questions now than there were answers, but that's how it always is when you learn. So, thanks for tuning in, and I'll be coming at you later. Have a good one.